I want to address. First off, we're both in Tout Wars. You're on the committee for Tout Wars. And always, I don't know what month it is, November, December, whatever it is, a million emails get exchanged on what we're going to change, what we'd like to see. They're very open to experimentation in Tout Wars. And one of the things they've changed is they turned batting average into on-base percentage, something that I'm on record of being against. Not because there's anything inherently wrong with on-base, although I do think batting average is a more interesting stat, if less realistic in terms of how it helps teams win in real life. But I just think it's different than what everyone else is doing, and I don't see why sort of a flagship league would like to be aligned with only 10% of the leagues or fewer in terms of its values, in terms of its rankings, auction prices, whatever, when 90% of the leagues are still using average. But more importantly, I don't really care that much about that battle. You and I have rehashed that many times, why I think average is better and why some people think on base is better. But more that I think that while it's great that people want to nerd out and do crazy stuff, and don't even get me started on the Tout Wars X and the craziness of that league. Knock yourself out, obviously. Do whatever floats your boat. But I think the innovation people need to make in baseball, especially like a league that's a leader among experts, is to make baseball easier, to keep the skill level and the competition level high, but to make it just an easier thing to enter and to maintain so that it's more like football in the sense that millions of people will do it. Because I think that there's too many people who would love fantasy baseball, which I think is actually a better game than fantasy football. We can go into why that is. But then it's too much work, and so it's got a very relatively small segment of the fantasy participation compared to football.
See, I think we need to stop making baseball be like football. I like that baseball is more complicated. It is. I like that baseball requires more effort. I like that there's more nuance to the game. I think there's a huge percentage of people that are playing baseball, and I don't want to cater to the lowest common denominator. I like that that play in an expert league is a high barrier. I mean, if you want to have that every year the X is going to be the experimental league because it's going to be a different format. You want to suggest to me a simpler format we want to try out one year as a low barrier to entry league? By all means, propose a way. I mean, the one thing that was a mistake in November is I think people are proposing all these things to apply to the main leagues, and we're not going to change those too drastically. There's a little tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it's going to be 5x5 roto. And yes, OBP versus average is a big change. It's a huge change. We made it. It's done. For the most part, those changes aren't going to be happening too much in those leagues unless we find that it works so well in the experimental league that people want to try it else elsewhere. But I doubt that's going to happen very often. More often than not, it's a chance to play different formats of leagues. We can do a simple league. We can do head-to-head. If you want to footballize baseball, make it head-to-head points. Have weekly matchups and all that. We'll probably do that one year.
You're missing my point, though. You're missing my point totally. What I said was, let's not make it like football in that it has to be head-to-head. I'm saying let's make it like football in that when you do your football draft or someone invites you to a football draft, you're not like, oh, Jesus, this is going to take 2 hours a week of my time minimum, so I can't do it. Or you have a family and a job, and you're like, I just can't deal with the nature of how many players and transactions there are in baseball. I can't deal with it. Not let's make it head-to-head like football. You keep it as baseball.
I know what you're saying.
No. You interpreted my point to say let's make it like football in terms of the competition and skill level. No. Let's keep it like baseball in terms of the luck skill balance, but let's make it like football in terms of how many hours a week must I devote to this thing? Do I have to be a slave to this thing? Can I never go away for a weekend without worrying about how I'm going to get my fab done on Sunday night? Is this going to take 6 months of every year of my life where traveling needs to be planned around my baseball moves? I mean, these are considerations that I think we need to make changes for baseball.
No, I don't. I disagree. That is part of the skill level, is that you have to be, that into it on a week-to-week basis there. Plan around it, find somebody to help you out in one given week. Do it ahead of time and then have check in later. I don't know. And the thing is, Chris, I don't think, you don't have to make it, to simplify, you don't have to make it head-to-head. But I like that you put in the effort.
But you suggested head-to-head, which made me feel like that's clearly not where I was going with it. That's a whole different game.
No, I'm not saying you have to do head-to-head. I get that that's not where you're going. I fully understand that. But I don't think we need to.
I wasn't suggesting that. Category 5x5 with average, in my opinion, is a great game. That needs no improvement. That is the game that I like. That is the game that makes the most sense, and it's better than fantasy football. And the reason it's better is football is basically a team game. It's 11 on 11. The teams themselves, it doesn't really matter whether the running back gets a 1-yard touchdown, there's a QB sneak, or they do a play action, throw it to the backup tight end. Nobody in real life cares about that, but in fantasy it means everything. And so in football, you're kind of going against what the teams are doing. You're kind of just hoping, they give it to your player. Whereas in baseball, it's one-on-one. Every guy is trying to maximize the impact of his at-bat. So you're really in line with what the game is when you're doing fantasy, right? So That's why I think baseball has less luck. There's a bigger sample of games, and it's more like the real game. I mean, it's not really, wins aren't that important in real life and whatever, but it's, at least the fantasy baseball game is really player-centric, just like real baseball is. And so I think it actually translates better to fantasy. So I love fantasy baseball. I love the 5x5 format. But the problem is it is too much of an investment of time. Pete Shankey had a great idea. Make leagues run Friday to Thursday. 2 reasons. One is you do all your fab stuff on Thursday, right, which, you're at work, you're in front of your computer. Every time you go away for the weekend, it's not some hassle to carve out this time, get home early, find internet access. Your phone is usually probably not very efficient in getting all these fab moves done, especially if you have 8 leagues. And then 2, everybody plays on Friday. So you're not sitting there on Monday with, 6 or 8 teams off saying, man, my day-to-day guy, he's not even playing tonight, and I've got to guess on my lineup. So there's 2 really good reasons.
No, and I agree with that.
Okay.
I
can agree on that one thing.
Solution. I agree with that one thing, and I'm sympathetic to your concern about, hey, I've got 2 kids, they're busy. They have busy lives, we have busy lives. We're gonna have family vacations, they have activities. I'm sympathetic to all that, but I don't want anything where we reduce player pool, where you don't have to think about as many players and all that. That's one of the things I like about baseball versus football. Is I'm way into the league, but the Friday to the first Thursday thing, I'm sympathetic to that. I'm on board with that. In fact, I was pushing for that. We'll see. We'll try it out in one of these leagues at some point in time, and I think that's going to be a big push. If we can change the industry that way, great. I'm all for that. But that doesn't affect your vacation schedule necessarily. It just happens when you go away for a weekend or something like that.
Right, but that's when people like to go away and come back because you're usually not working. But that's a small thing. And the problem is if only one league does it, you still have all your other leagues. Now you got 2, then you get whipsawed where you have 2 days of deadlines, right? So hopefully every league can move there. But that's one thing. Here's some other things. Commish services. They need to do a much better job of making the free agents that everybody obviously wants at the top of everybody's queue by default. They should actually have an expert hired by the companies, CBS, ESPN, Yahoo, that when you don't have to sort by bats and then sort by preseason rankings for all the injured guys that might be coming back and then sort by strikeouts or whatever else you need to sort by or saves or whatever. It just has an expert take 10 or 15 of the guys that everybody wants or rank them 1 through 30 and whatever guys in that batch are available in your league, those are the guys that show up on the top of the queue. Digging through these queues and resorting is a huge waste of my time. Things like that, right? That's an easy fix that will make baseball easier.
There is something. Let me suggest that there's something out there. There's most added. There's most owned. That gets you somewhere there. You can do sort by the last 15 days value. Some of the services will do that. I mean, once you get into subjective rankings, then someone slips through and someone's going to be howling at the moon about that. Or other people are like, oh, don't give my opponents a chance to catch up on me. I put in the work. Don't let my lazy opponents catch up on me. I can see that. The NFBC, do you really want someone being spoon-fed?
Yeah, I want everybody to put the top 30 or 40 guys up there. I don't want to scroll through the list. I can choose which one I want to bid what on, but the idea that I've got to this injured guy that may be coming back in 3 weeks, nobody's thought of him. Somebody should have that guy in the top 40 potential pickups for the week or the top 30 or whatever it is, and to the extent that those guys are still available in my league, they'll show up. In a deeper league, there'll only be 10 of those guys left, so those will show up in the top 10. Why is everybody doing this labor? Every single person's individually scrolling through these lists. There should be one person that scrolls through the list for everybody. That's just an inefficient use of people's time. My time is valuable. It's like phone trees. When you call customer service, they're like, for one, press this. Everybody's 1 minute of time to get through the phone tree collectively is millions of minutes. It's a horrible waste of everybody's energy and time. These things are important, okay? This would make baseball easier, okay? Another thing.
One of your big problems, I'm even worse, is you have too many leagues.
Well,
I think the average roto player has 2 or 3 leagues tops, and it's not so much of a burden for them. They enjoy digging into the trenches there a little bit more than you do, because you have to do it time and time over, and you have to remember which rules apply to which, and you have to remember, okay, on this service I can put the bids in this way. I know you run into that in football worse probably than baseball, but I'm sure you have the same issue there too in setting up your alternatives. That's a real pain in the butt. I get you on that.
But even if you're in 3 leagues that are competitive, I mean, it's just going to take 45 minutes the more time you need to take, it's a waste. Let one person do the work for 50 people. To me, at least have it be an option. Okay, you could do it yourself if you want. Have that be an option. Every commission service should offer that. Okay. Another one that nobody seemed to like is September. Just scrap September. Okay, September. It's a joke. It's like week 17 in the NFL. Tons of guys are shut down. Tons of guys with minor injuries are shut down. There's no DL that they use anymore, so you don't know. A guy could be hurt, and he would have been on the DL during a regular part of the season. You don't know whether to use him or not. You're just guessing. That's terrible. Okay. 2, they just sit them just because they need rest. Teams have full, basically, minor league teams hitting. Last year, the Diamondbacks from about August 1st on did not have, Goldschmidt was hurt for a lot of it. A.J. Pollock was hurt. They had total scrubs populating their entire lineup, and you could basically put any pitcher against them. And so the whole game, in September is just, let me find anybody with 2 starts against these zombie lineups, and I'm going to win my league doing that. And I've won leagues doing that, but I'm not proud of it. It was just, I didn't necessarily have a better team, or I didn't draft better. I didn't evaluate players better than the guy who finished second. I just happened to hustle more and leverage something that's just kind of dumb. I think, September with 40-man rosters and all this stuff, I think we just cut it out. Let's make it through August 31st.
I wouldn't mind trying that once. Just see how that goes. I think it's, clearly it favors front runners. And what other thing that it would do is if you invest in, it really curtail investment in prospects. It'd be less reason to invest in some of those prospects that aren't going to be up to start the season, because you're getting even less time with them.
Yeah, that's true. But you just price that in. If a guy gets called up in June,
you would.
Got a few months. Obviously, if he gets called up in September, you probably didn't want him anyway. But you're right. A guy gets called up usually they call up in early June. There's still some value to them if they play regularly. Okay, so there's a couple ideas. And I just think overall, things like if a guy gets hurt, on a Monday, I don't know, things like best balling a little bit, having more best ball scenarios for weekly stuff. Just make it easier. Make it so that, because I don't, you could say, well, this is fun or I like this, but, I think as an industry, we want more people playing fantasy baseball and enjoying it. I really think it's the best fantasy game. And a lot of people smartly just say, look, it's a hobby, but it's not one I can spend 10 hours, 12, 15 hours a week on, even though I could really devote that time in March and do the research, and I love watching my guys perform. I just don't want this ongoing marathon where I'm doing this all 6 months, half of every year. And I realize it's partly because I have a lot of leagues. But that would be innovation, and make it simpler without losing the strategic complexity, without losing the strategic enjoyment. Just make the actual mechanics and the time spent more efficient. I think that'll be a huge home run, and I think that's what Tout Wars should be focused on personally. They can geek out all they want. Any individual league should. You want to get a league where it's a 40-hour-a-week job, knock yourself out. I'm all for that. But I just don't think that's really, going to catch on or be viable for mainstream fantasy players.
I don't think Tout Wars or any other expert league is ever going to do that, because they're operating under the presumption that they're serving the baseball universe, and thus, people have the time to put into September when they're not focusing on football. There are a lot of baseball-only guys in that, for instance, and hey, that's going to be a tough hurdle to overcome. Like I said, I'd like to try to play a league like that where we don't count September sometime, see what happens, but it's going to be a really tough row to hoe to get that involved in an expert league. Maybe your home league. You should propose it to your home league, see what they say.
My home league is pretty low maintenance. I mean, it's one of the easier leagues. And I think actually labor...
It's every other week of transactions, right?
Yeah, it's like every other week, sometimes every 3 weeks, and there's other issues with that. But it's lower maintenance. But labor, which is the oldest expert league that I know of, the continuous expert league, is pretty low maintenance because it's AL only, and you don't really have to make a ton of moves. It doesn't take that long. The list is obvious. It's kind of like you don't need to have a guy pre-curate your AL labor list because you can't pick up DL guys or minor league guys, and there's nobody on the waiver wire anyway usually. So it's really easy, and I actually really like that. It's like your auction is pretty much everything. You can make trades, obviously, but it's just mostly about really having a good team at auction, and that's great. And then you watch your guys perform. So I think we need more of that. I think the baseball-only guys are a little myopic and just thinking, well, this is who we're serving. I mean, I just think, like, why not grow this thing? Anyway, that's my piece on that. If you have something else to say, go ahead, but we can move on to another topic.
Let's move on to another topic. I'm good.
Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is draft prep because, it's February, and, we're starting to get to the point where we're making our cheat sheets and getting ready for our auctions and our drafts. Maybe not even you have one imminently. I may schedule to beat Chris Liss NFBC early. I love early. I did the FSTA draft. I love my team, but more just because nobody knows where anyone's going because the ADPs haven't really, hardened yet. And, there's nobody says, well, this guy's definitely a mid-second rounder. I think the first round is already kind of congealed sort of already. Like now people have all their slots for everybody. But beyond that, even this was almost a month ago, so that wasn't the case then. But beyond the first round, I think it's pretty fluid, and I like that. I like being able to get a guy in the fifth, that later will be a third rounder in a month and a half, or being able to get a guy in the 10th that'll later be a fifth rounder in 2 months, because nobody was sure where to take them, and they didn't know. Injured guys coming back like Tanaka, nobody knows where to take him, so he drops. Prince Fielder, nobody knows what to do with him, so he dropped. That once the ADP start coming in from these paid leagues like NFBC, people say, I see. The wisdom of crowds of an expert, well-informed crowd has said Prince Fielder is a fourth or fifth rounder. Now I'm safe taking him here, even though nobody knows what to expect. I now have this market-based sort of backup for my decision, and I don't like that. Now it got easier for everybody. It's not harder anymore.
Right, and not to mention there's all these guys coming back from injury at spring training. You see how they look. You see how hard they're throwing. You can tell at least a little bit whether they're healthy, how healthy they're going to be. Now, there's still surprises and all that as we get closer and closer to opening day, but I don't think it's a mistake that my best results in the NFBC and FFC have been with earlier drafts. The main event, not so much. I haven't won in the NFBC. I've won on the online. I've won on the Draft Champions Leagues. I won the NFFC online league that I was in this year. For the most part, I've demonstrably done better the earlier the draft. I'm with you on this.
Right. There's less edge to be had. It's more, how do I maximize my pick strategy? How do I optimally structure a team rather than, I know about some players that not everybody's onto yet. The market hasn't really solved this problem. So that's one thing. The other thing, and this is just anecdotal, but I'm just going to throw this out there, is I haven't done my deep baseball research. When I talk about deep research, I'm talking about going through the RotoWire depth chart page, player by player, painstakingly looking up, reading his player outlook that you guys did for the magazine that's on the site, reading his latest updates, looking at his advanced stats. What was his velocity? What was what was his strikeout rate? Do I need to look at first and second half splits if I seem to remember a guy coming on or falling apart? Try to figure out why those things happen. If I'm really, really stuck, I'll go to Fangraphs and just look at what kind of pitch percentage was curveballs and usage and crazy stuff like that. But is that overkill? And I just thought about it because I did this Yahoo Friends and Family basketball league, and I don't know shit about basketball anymore. I mean, I know how to play fantasy basketball because I know the strategy and I've done it for a long time, but I wasn't really that up on the player pool. I know the guys I know. And my team's really good. I mean, I'm like fourth place because I didn't even set my lineup a couple weeks. But if you look at the players on the team, I drafted really well. Guys like Gasol, and I had Cousins, and I have Damon Lillard, and all these guys. And it was just because when I was drafting, I was like, I don't know, why not Gasol in this round? Why not this guy in that round? And I didn't have all these reasons not to take these guys because I just wasn't that well read. And I think sometimes you get too close to it and you can make a case for or against every single player in the pool, and it just becomes this big bunch of noise in your head, and it's just overwhelming, and you have too much information, and you don't just sort of say, you know what, I know this guy was good for a long time. I don't know exactly what his status is, but in this round, boom, I'm taking David Wright. I'm taking Prince Fielder. I'm taking Votto. I don't care. They've got, they're in their 30s now. They've got some nagging crap coming in the season, but they're going to play. I'm in on these guys. And I think, like, if you read too much, look at too much, sometimes you can't simplify it that well.
I think that works for the top half of the draft. I think where you run into some trouble maybe is later. And in baseball, that matters more because you go deeper and you need more positions. You need to have your guys, the guys that you feel can be difference makers, as opposed to taking a name off the list. I think that's where you kind of run into it. You're going to know the fundamentals of some of these guys, but maybe players new to the player pool, first or second year, or guys coming from overseas, maybe those are the guys you spend a little bit more time reading up on.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, in the FSTA, I took Chris Owings, right, because I hadn't read up on anybody. I was using the RotoWire iPad app, and it was really good because you pull up the player that you're looking at, and it has the stuff right in front of you when you're thinking of drafting him. And Owings looks like he's going to start at short. Didi Gregorius is gone. He was kind of a hot name last year, as this guy can actually hit, and he's playing in a good park. He's going to get the starting job. What ends up happening in the later rounds, and maybe you're right when you get, obviously AL Labor, AL Touts can be a little different because that's super deep. But even in a 15-team mixed league, I end up with Scooter Gennett and Chris Owings and Danny Santana as my middles, having waited on middle, and I'm happy with that because I just was like, well, these are some names I know. These are some guys that had a spark or had some interest at one point, so I don't really look into it any further than that. It's like they're there late. Sometimes maybe that's better than like all these reports you're reading about this guy who might win playing time, or I don't know. I think you're right, maybe in AL only, that like you can't get away with it. But in mixed league, maybe you can't.
Maybe you can, and the thing is, again, you're starting from a base that's higher than your average player again because, yeah, maybe you didn't do the painstaking depth chart research, but you're on air all throughout baseball season. Some of that had to stick when we're talking about those guys last season. And we're talking about it every day. I mean, it's a little different for you than it is for others. At least some of the, like Danny Santana, some people might not just look at his, their first introduction to him, if they didn't own him last year, might be when they look at, his ranking, they're like, oh, who's this guy? And I think that's something that's a little bit different from you from someone else.
Yeah, you're right. And well, I wasn't really talking about, deep baseball stuff at the time of this draft, but I also did do the depth chart research the last few years. So it's like I have this database in my head of names. I may not get some of the new names. Who's the guy, Kang? I think he's Korean.
Jung-Ho Kang from South Korea, signed with the Pirates.
Right. So that was a guy that I just came across when I was updating this article. I do this article that's sort of the how to draft and all this stuff, and Aaron asked me to update it because it gets traffic because people search for it. And I was updating like who the 17th to 19th ranked, the replacement value of shortstop at a mixed 12-team league would be, and it was actually Owings, Andrelton Simmons, and Kang. And I was like, Kang, who is this guy? So I started researching, and I'm like, oh, this dude could be legit. So there are guys like that you want to know, right? You want to sort of be aware that those guys are at that level of the player pool. But actually with the app, like they're on your list, and you click on them, and that stuff comes up, and you find out about it.
Yeah, and see, did you feel like you were equipped to handle the runs in FSGA, like say run on closers? Although I know you went early, so maybe it didn't matter to you. But say if you had waited to get your first closer, would you have felt like you've been ready to know where the drop-off is, where you're comfortable with closers, without doing the research?
No. As part of the reason I went early, and part of the reason was because it was round 6 and I was kind of stuck. I didn't really love any of the hitters or the starting pitchers. None of them jumped out at me. So I said, all right, I'll take Kimbrel.
Right.
That's, to me, it's always the time where you're like, it's like when you take a quarterback in football. You're like, there's no wide receiver running back that jumps out, so I'll go ahead and take that quarterback that I was waiting on. It's when you shift gears.
You totally read my mind there. I was trying to find the football analog, and I was going right toward thinking, okay, closers are quarterbacks. Yeah, that's about right. That's funny.
Right, because you're supposed to go wide receiver and running back heavy for 5 rounds, but it's the same thing. It's like you're starting pitcher and offense heavy. Then suddenly you're like, all right, I'm stuck, closer. And I did it on purpose. And I took Cody Allen as my second one in round 8, which is the only thing I kind of regret a little because I forgot that Matt Harvey was on the list, and I probably would have taken him and then had to grub for a closer later, but I didn't have that problem because I got too early. And maybe that's also sort of a leftover thing from the NFBC where there's no trading, and you just have to take closers. I mean, I think in the NFBC, especially if you're on the corners, I'm starting to think, I picked first last time, and that league did pretty well. I just had no starting pitching. My starting pitching collapsed, but it's good enough. 6 out of 10 categories gets you somewhere. But if you're on the ends, right, where the runs you really can't, I mean, it's 30 picks. I think you got to be more aggressive on closers and even catchers in the NFBC when you're on the ends, because you're like, you're going to get victimized if you wait around too long. So if you're at all stuck, go ahead and pony up for one of those closers. Now, Kimbrel may go in round 3 or Chapman, and that's a really steep price. So I don't know, I would do that. But in rounds 4 and 5, if a Holland or a Jansen is there, you might have to jump in.
And it's funny you mentioned that because in mixed league labor, it drafts on Tuesday night. I've got the number 1 pick. Now it's trading, but it's a little different than the FBC. But it is 15 teams. We're doing an expert mock, where I also had the number 1 pick. Kind of lucked out that it worked that way, and I did double up on closers. I felt like that was the right play. I missed out on the first tier closers, so I took the next 2 in the next tier that I liked the best. It's like, okay, I'm not going to wait around and try to find that one third tier closer that I like. No, I'm going to take 2 from this tier, be done with it.
Yeah, it's because the thing about closers that's weird is they're not that valuable when you do like standard deviations or whatever method you use to calculate player value, but they are unique in the sense that nobody else can get you saves. Like in baseball, anybody can get you steals. No matter what position they play, they can get you steals, right? But starting pitchers just cannot get you saves. They cannot do it. And I mean, I guess if you get like a Smoltz who gets converted mid-season one year, but that's so unlikely. Pretty much, or Chris Sale that one year got converted for half a season, I think, or maybe he went the other way.
No, it was like for 2 games. It went right back to starting. That was the
right, and then he was like awesome as a starter after he was like he's going to be out for the year. I'm positive. Oh, now he's going to close. Now he's like an elite starter. That was really weird.
It was such a bizarre sequence.
Yeah, that was strange. But what I'm saying is basically like that's the only source of saves, right? If you need to do well in saves, say in the overall for NFBC, it's very hard to win without. The guy who won last year actually was pretty low in saves, but that's certainly a rarity to do so well across the board in every category. You need saves, or in leagues where a lot of guys drop out, in the second half, they stop making moves, and there's 3 or 4 teams that are super strong everywhere. You're not going to win by tanking saves, so. You can get them on the waiver wire, but everyone's trying to get the same guys you are. I think that's what makes them valuable is that they're unique.
Yeah, I think you're completely right about that, and I think that that's a completely different beast. And I've resolved in FBC I will not get screwed on closers this year. My best main event league team was strong in saves. Last year I screwed it up badly. 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago, I screwed it up badly. That is not going to be a problem for me this year.
Yeah, and you'll see though. I mean, it's tough, because it's a tough league and where you fall, and there's one other the opposite point though. I think is you don't want to be bullied into taking a closer you don't love, right? Like there's like 6 or 7 guys I like, and then it gets to a point where I'm like, I'm just not taking Houston Street. In the 8th round because I just don't trust him to stay healthy, and I'm not going to just take him because he's because all the closers I like are gone and he's there and I need a closer. That's the point where I say, all right, I didn't want to have to do this, but I'm going to hope to get Jake McGee later and hope that he gets healthy quickly or somebody like that. I think you definitely want 1 rock, and then I think ideally you want 2 rocks, but you get 1. And then, okay, I can figure the rest out. And I don't want to be bullied into taking that second guy that I don't trust too early, or even the first guy. I mean, sometimes the draft just falls a certain way. There's players you can't turn down in the 4th round. And then you're like, all right, it's going to be another year of closer roulette, and I've got to just play it.
Well, and when you get stuck playing closer roulette, I think you have to make up for it in quantity. I think you really have to attack it there. And you have to take a couple of those top closers and waiting in the draft itself, and not rely on hitting it big in the free agent market, because Scott Genstad illustrated that issue in his article on the site, and it's also in the magazine about reviewing the last year's NFBC champ and how his team did and all that. And he showed basically there was only 2 closers you really hit big on in the free agent market last year, and there's a lot of whiffs. You got K-Rod, Doolittle, those worked out really well. A lot of people spent a lot of money on Kyle Farnsworth too, and not so much on that.